Good afternoon, and welcome to this professional development session on English Learner or EL education in Arizona. Today, we'll explore Arizona's definition of an EL, the demographic context, what a structured English immersion SEI means in Arizona, and dive into the state's language development approach or LDA. We'll also explore student agency, the approved SEI model options in Arizona, eligibility and assessment procedures, including the Arizona English Language Learner Assessment or AZELA, and parents' right in the process. Let's get this started. In Arizona, the definition of an English learner is rooted in statute and policy. A student whose primary home language is other than English and who does not yet meet the proficiency threshold of the AZELA is identified as an EL and thus eligible for EL services. The home language survey is used at enrollment to determine whether the student's home language is something other than English, and based on that, the school determines if the student must take the AZELA placement test. ELs are students who bring a home language other than English and require language development to access grade-level English instruction. This is not simply a label, it drives placement, programming, and monitoring. To give you the context of the EL population in Arizona, in the 2016-17 school year, there were about 83,500 EL students. That's roughly 7% of the total K-12 student body. At the earliest grades K, the proportion is higher, around 16%, and this percentage declines across the grades to about 1% in grade 12 in that year. Regarding home language composition, Spanish remains the predominant home language, with approximately 73% of EL students in early years speaking Spanish at home. Smaller percentages speak Arabic, Vietnamese, Navajo, or other languages. Also noteworthy, about 30% of school-age children in Arizona have one or more foreign-born parents. For classroom teachers, this data reminds us many ELs arrive with rich home language and cultural backgrounds, and language proficiency and needs vary widely across grades and language groups. SEI in Arizona is the required instructional model for ELs, unless parent opt-out or dual language waiver applies. Under Arizona revised statutes, once a student is identified as an EL, they must be placed in an SEI classroom, a classroom where instruction is tailored specifically to accelerate English language development. The law also specifies minimum instructional minutes, at least 120 minutes per day of ELD for K-5 and at least 100 minutes per day for grades 6 to 12. For clarity, SEI classrooms differ from sheltered English instruction. The latter often takes place in mainstream classes in which both EL and non-EL students are present, with teachers adapting language and scaffolding for ELs. In contrast, SEI classroom, per Arizona law, group ELs together and focus on explicit English language instruction. As classroom teachers, you may partner with SEI classroom teachers or provide sheltered instruction in your content area, so it's important to know the distinction. Arizona's language development approach, or LDA, was formally adopted in December 2019 by the Arizona State Board of Education. The foundational belief is that EL students bring assets, and that success is not just the responsibility of the EL teacher, it is a shared responsibility of all educators. The LDA synthesizes research on second language learning, biliteracy, and culturally sustaining practices to provide a cohesive framework for EL instruction across all program models. Its ultimate aim is to empower EL learners by helping them develop a sense of agency, confidence, and determination to succeed in rigorous content and language instructions. As teachers, even if you are not the designated EL teacher, you are part of the system that advances the school. The first principle is asset-based behaviors and expectations. Rather than viewing ELs through a deficit lens, what they can't do in English, this principle asserts that multilingualism and cultural knowledge are powerful assets. For example, a teacher might structure a unit where students' home language or cultural experiences become part of the inquiry or classroom discourse, thereby validating and leveraging those experiences. The principle also emphasizes ensuring that EL students feel respected, safe, and included, recognizing their socio-emotional and cultural identity matters. Importantly, when students feel their backgrounds are assets, they are more likely to develop agency, that is, confidence, self-efficacy, and the belief they can influence their learning. For content learners, this could mean incorporating opportunities for multilingual students to use their home language as a resource, or inviting students to share how their linguistic background helps them understand concepts. Principle 2 emphasizes that language development and content instruction are not separate. They must be integrated. In other words, EL students should not be relegated to isolate language drills outside of meaningful context. Rather, they engage in grade level disciplinary content, science, math, social studies, ELA, while explicitly learning the language of that discipline, its vocabulary, discourse patterns, and practices. For example, when teaching a physics lessons on force and motion, a teacher might explicitly teach academy vocabulary, acceleration, net force, vectors, to name but a few, and discipline-specific language structures, while engaging the students in hands-on experiments. Collaboration between content teachers and EL or SEI teachers is essential so language objectives align with content objectives. For you as a classroom teacher, this means planning with the EL specialist, if available, to co-design tasks that scaffold both content and language for ELs. Principle 3 highlights the necessity of targeted and explicit language instruction. This means strategic planning of language goals, scaffolding, modeling, and practice specifically for ELs to build proficiency in all domains: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. For example, an explicit mini lesson on the difference between academic and conversational language, followed by scaffolded practice, supports ELs more directly than assuming they'll pick up those skills incidentally. Principle 4 focuses on assessment, monitoring, and feedback. It affirms that EL programming must include systematic assessment, not just the ESELA, but ongoing formative assessments, to monitor students' progress and inform instructional decisions. Moreover, student feedback and encouraging students to set their own language development goals fosters agency and ownership of learning. As classroom teachers, you should regularly monitor EL's language growth, collaborate with the EL teacher, provide timely feedback, and adjust scaffolds as needed. A central theme in Arizona's LDA is student agency, enabling learners to direct their own language and content learning rather than being passive recipients. According to TeachHub, student agency means that students have voice and choice, engage in meaningful tasks, and take ownership of their learning. Research shows that giving students choice and autonomy leads to higher engagement and better outcomes. For ELs, agency is especially important. Language acquisition takes time and effort, and when students feel they have control, they are more motivated, persistent, and confident. In practice, in your classroom, you might let EL students choose a topic for a language content project, encourage them to track their language goals in a journal, or involve them in peer monitoring and self-reflection. These strategies enhance their sense of voice, self-determination, and confidence, which the LDA explicitly links to student outcomes. Arizona offers several approved research-based structured English immersion models that schools may implement, depending on context, student needs, and community. The newcomer model is aimed at recently arrived ELs and typically involves an intensive block, sometimes 4 hours per day, of ELD before transitioning into mainstream classes. The pull-out model involves EL students being pulled from mainstream classrooms for dedicated ELD instruction. The 2-hour model provides a daily 2-hour ELD block targeting language development. Finally, the 50-50 dual language immersion model, which requires parental waiver, is a biliteracy model in which instruction is equally split between English and the partner language. Though still within the SEI framework in Arizona, it meets the rigorous criteria and aligns with LDA principles. As classroom teachers, you may encounter students in any of these models, and you should collaborate with EL specialists to ensure alignment with classroom instruction, scaffolding, and progress monitoring. Here's how the EL program eligibility and assessment process works in Arizona. First, upon enrollment, a home language survey is completed asking, what language is spoken in the home most of the time? What language does the student speak most of the time? What language did the students first speak or understand? If the student's primary home language is not English, then they take the ESELA placement test. The ESELA assesses listening, speaking, reading, and writing and generates a composite proficiency level. A student whose score is below proficient is placed in an EL program or ACA model and must be reassessed annually or as specified until they meet the criteria for proficiency. The exit criteria includes scoring proficient overall and in reading and writing domains. As classroom teachers, it's important to know which of your students are ELs, what their ESELA proficiency level is, if available, and to collaborate with EL teachers regarding placement, progress monitoring, and transition to mainstream instruction. The final slide covers accommodations and parents' or guardians' rights. Arizona provides standard accommodations for EL students taking the ESL, such as extended time, separate location, language supports, in accordance with state and federal guidance. Regarding rights, parents or guardians may refuse EL program placement and they may refuse the ESL assessment. They must be notified in writing about identification, placement, and reassessment. As classroom teachers, maintaining open communication with families of EL students, explaining their rights and options, and partnering with them in student goals and programming is crucial for empowering and supporting EL learners. To conclude, we've covered the comprehensive overview of EL education in Arizona, how students are defined, placed, and served, the research-based framework we are using statewide, the importance of student agency, and the laws, rights, and models relevant to EL instruction. Your role as a classroom teacher is critical, identifying ELs, being partnered to the EL specialist, integrating language and content, and promoting student agency. As next steps, I encourage you to review your class lists for EL students and collaborate with EL personnel, plan for scaffolds and language objectives, and engage families of EL learners. Thank you for your dedication to serving multilingual learners. And now, I welcome questions and reflection.